Well, first of all, as I don't know what you've been told. I recently got infected with COVID apparently, so I got the confirmation this morning. So I'm gonna try to do this a little blindsided. As you can tell, my voice is a bit shot. I apologize in advance if I slur or if I have blanks. I am, after all, sick, so please bear with me. I understand we're all late, but we'll get there. Alright, so From Obsession to Aesthetics, Comparing Artistic Creation in Fernando Pessoa and Austin Osman Spare. So this presentation is about a number of parallels that I found while studying the work of the two artists, Austin Osman Spare and Fernando Pessoa. It's, by the way, a shame that I was unable to see Robert's presentation on Spare. I might repeat some information because I actually don't know what he said. I apologize for that too. But anyway, I during studying the work of these two artists, I found what seemed to be a number of parallels. These parallels are of different natures. There are, first of all, external parallels, such as both of these were perfectly contemporary. I think Spare was just 2 years older than Pessoa. They were two artists with a keen interest in magic, and both of them seem to be acquainted with Aleister Crowley. Now, besides this, what I found much more interesting was that they seem to, through their own explorations and their own considerations on the nature of self, they seem to have arrived at similar conclusions regarding the nature of fiction, personality, and artistic creation. Both seem to have come to this realization of the possibility of personality fragmentation and permutation as a means to create art. Now, for Pessoa, this fragmentation seems to arrive from his ideas of intellectualism or lack of intellectualism, that through certain intellectual exercises he was able to create alternative personalities, which he usually referred to as heteronyms. For Spare, these were actually almost on the opposite side of the scale. These ideas of personality fragmentation came from his explorations of the subconscious desire and emotions. And these fragments, he and his commentators typically label under the categories of elementals or familiars. Now, to now keep going on this, some biographical details. Fernando Pessoa was born in 1888 in Lisbon, but he was educated in South Africa, meaning that he was perfectly bilingual in Portuguese and English. He returned to Lisbon in 1905 to join the university. He showed very little interest in an academic career, and I think he organized a student riot and left shortly afterwards, just stopped showing up. When it comes to his interest in magic, this can be detected in his writings as early as 1906. There are written evidence of his interests in theosophy. He was actually the first translator of theosophical works in Portuguese. Interested in Thelema and astrology, and also Gnosticism and mystical nationalism. Now, you will notice that I put these last two under between quotation marks, because scholars under quotation marks of Portuguese esotericism also they like to throw these out, but honestly I have never seen a definition of what Gnosticism or mystical nationalism constitutes in Pessoa, so I'm putting these here mostly for tradition's sake. To be honest, I don't know what that is, but let's move on. His interest in Thelema, however, was significant enough to, at a certain point, he sent a letter to Mandrake Press after reading Aleister Crowley's Confessions, correcting Aleister Crowley's astrological chart, which actually prompted that him and Crowley met in Lisbon in 1930. The exact nature of this meeting is somewhat of a historical mystery. Crowley seemed to be interested in establishing some kind of lodge in Portugal. We do know that he initiated Raul Leal, who was a Portuguese poet, an acquaintance of Pessoa. There are no evidence that he initiated Pessoa into anything. And there was also some kind of commercial interest by both of these. Apparently Pessoa and Crowley wanted to use each other for some kind of commercial gain. But whatever happened, their meeting culminated with Crowley simulating his own suicide in a place called Boca do Inferno, the mouth of hell, which is in this posh little town outside of Lisbon called Cascais. And this was again just a publicity stunt, and Pessoa was actually supposed to write a novel about the investigation of the crime, which he actually never did. He wrote a few chapters, a few versions are known, but he never finished it. And actually, shortly after this, Pessoa actually seems to lose his interest in Tolima and actually stops responding to Crowley's letters. Now, when it comes to his literary achievements, Pessoa very quickly integrates himself into the Lisbon artistic milieu, but his association with any pre-established groups is very short-lived. And he eventually breaks off and he joins with other young modernist poets to create his own artistic styles and forms of aesthetics. Three of the most important literary movements or artistic movements that Pessoa created are these three. The first one is Paulism, or from the Portuguese Paul, meaning marsh. It's close to decadentism, and it uses aberrant syntax to describe states of spiritual depth. Intersectionism seems to be influenced by vorticism and cubism. It's basically, one of the definitions Pessoa gives is the intersection of an object with the sensation of that same object, which is an idea that's ultimately realized in sensationism, which is probably Pessoa's artistic crowning achievement, which very basically states that there is nothing, no reality but sensation, meaning that any individual, his impression of any object or reality itself can only be done through his sensation or his feelings regarding that object. This means that in order to have a wider range of knowledge about any one thing, an individual should strive to experience that thing from the greatest amount of angles possible. This is where heteronymity comes into play. Heteronymity is the process by which Pessoa claims to somehow be able to step outside of himself and allow for a semi-autonomous personality to manifest and produce a piece of art. Now, there is some controversy regarding what exactly constitutes a heteronym or how many heteronyms Pessoa actually had. There are, at this point, I think hundreds of different pen names that Pessoa used. Not all of these would constitute heteronyms, but I'm going to consider the following three as heteronyms because Pessoa defined them as such. These are the Hellenist Ricardo Reis, the depressed futurist Álvaro Campos, and the anti-philosophical Alberto Caeiro. Regarding the nature of these heteronyms, Pessoa would say, I placed in Caeiro all my power of dramatic impersonification, in Ricardo Reis all my mental discipline, garbed in its appropriate music, in Álvaro Campos all the emotion I did not afford neither to myself nor to life. I hear you, don't worry. Thank you. Somebody just slipped something under the door. Regarding the particular phenomenon of manifestation of these heteronyms, he would say, he would write as Caeiro by pure and unexpected inspiration without even knowing that I would be writing. Ricardo Reis, after an abstract deliberation which suddenly fulfills itself in an ode. Campos, when I feel a sudden impulse to write, and I don't know what. Now, the interesting phenomenon of heteronymity, Pessoa would claim that he was able to change his personality into these different individuals by the fact that he diagnosed himself as being heteroneurasthenic. Now, heteroneurasthenic is somewhat of a mystery. This is a condition that Pessoa mentions a few times, although it's hard to explain or to know what actually he meant by heteroneurasthenic. But an interesting point is that he offers this condition as a possible explanation for mediumship. Now, this means that the phenomenon of heteronymity for Pessoa was basically something of the same nature as a medium in a seance. And he would actually quite explicitly say that he was a medium in this way of myself. Regarding the conception of heteronyms in a more magical aspect, he would also come to say that the creation of Cairo and the discipleship of Reis and Campos seems, at first sight, to be an elaborate joke of the imagination. But it is not. It is a great act of intellectual magic, a magnum opus of the impersonal creative power. I need all the concentration I can have for the preparation of what might be called figuratively as an act of intellectual magic, that is to say, for the preparation of a literary creation in a, so to speak, fourth dimension of the mind. Now, having covered Pessoa and heteronyms, let's now look at Spare. He was born, according to some sources, 1886. In Snow Hill in London. His formal academic training started at the Lambert Art School at age 11. He seemed to have been influenced primarily by Romanticism and Decadentism, and he was had early artistic success, but just gradually fell into obscurity. Now, Spare's interest in magic is a lot more explicit than Pessoa's. He was initiated in the Golden Dawn, as far as I know, in 1910. He was supposedly also initiated into the AA, although I couldn't find the date in time for this presentation. I'm sure somebody there would know. Overall, magic is a lot more explicit in Spare's writings. And not only magic, also the relation he establishes between that and automatic drawing. Now, for Spare published a paper or an essay on the nature of automatic writing, and this essay is actually not that extraordinary or innovative. It simply claims that the subconscious mind is a near infinite repertoire of creativity, and that the artist should strive to access and explore the subconscious mind in order to be able to produce art beyond the limited tenet of theme, subject, and object. This would be done through the exploration of instincts, desires, and obsessions. Now, this needs to be understood for Spare not solely as a purely artistic endeavor. It was also a spiritual one, because this search for this exploration of desires and baseline emotions was equally a search for individual self and expression by bypassing educational and social repressions, meaning that this process was also a method for spiritual and intellectual liberation. Now, one of the conclusions that Spare apparently also got to was that, in his exploration of obsessions, that identity is an obsession made up of a composite of personalities, meaning that our current identities are merely a circumstantial overlap of several personalities. Now, these personalities could be picked according to some methods. There are reports of him using self-hypnosis, I believe, probably other methods too. These can be picked, reified, or even given semi-autonomous existence as familiars and instrumentalized for the creation of art. Now, having looked at what would constitute a familiar elemental in Spare and a heteronym in Pessoa, so both these artists seem to have arrived at this idea of personality change, personality permutation, and fragmentation. Now, this parallel suggests that there is something between these. And not only them, in fact, because if we even look at Aleister Crowley, he also seems to have ideas quite similar to these. This is from his Confessions. I did not see why I should be confined to one life. How can one hope to understand the world if one persists in regarding it from the conning tower of one's own personality? So, it seems that these three men, who were all acquainted, all came to similar conclusions and similar ideas on personality. Now, I'm obviously not saying that any of these men learned or acquired this idea from any of the other three. This is impossible. Much the contrary, I'm saying that they are acquiring this idea from their overall milieu. Because if we stop focusing solely on heteronymity or elementals from a perspective of magic, and rather start looking at them from the modernist artistic milieu, we actually find that there are several artists also talking about issues of personality fragmentation and permutation. For example, what's happening? Oh, here we go. Percy Wyndham Lewis, who was a theorizer and a writer on cubism and vorticism, the chemistry of personality subterranean in a sort of cemetery whose decompositions are our lives, puffs up in frigid balls, soapy snowmen, Arctic carnival masks which you can photograph and fix. So rather, what seems to be suggested here is that the issue of personality fragmentation is not so much merely associated with magical practice, it is actually associated with modernism. In modernism rather exists in an explicitly disenchanted world, and fragmentation in modernism is a search for meaning in that same disenchanted world. Now, if to two artists who are in contact with modernist ideas, we add issues such as the psychologization of magic as proposed by Crowley, and who Spare and Pessoa were familiar with, Freudian and Jungian theories, which again, Spare and Pessoa were familiar with, then the stage is set for artist magicians and magician artists to come up with these same ideas of personality fragmentation as a means for magic and art. Now, what this also says from a more macroscopic view is that when we're talking about the late 19th century and early 20th century, every time we hear an artist magician or a magician artist claiming art is magic and magic is art, that statement, no matter how banal, should be taken at face value. As exemplified by Spare and Pessoa, modernism is not solely a source for artistic aesthetics. It can also be observed to be a source of spiritual practice. Thank you.